if you don't already know, the Kardashians are the Clintons with more adrenochrome. And if you don't know what adrenochrome is, you've come to the right place. This is Inverted World Live. I'm just going to come right out and say it. Alex is having dreams about the Kardashians.
I am.
What's up with that?
Well, not just the Kardashians, but AI. It's my first AI dream I've ever had.
Your first AI dream?
Yeah, it's weird.
So it's like a dream that you're dreaming about AI in your life, and it's infiltrating now your sleep.
I just live in AI.
Would you say it was a dream or was it a nightmare?
I was scared. So
I'm living an AI nightmare, but you're dreaming about it.
Like AI doesn't scare me in real life, but in my dreams it does.
Not yet. Just wait until it replaces you.
I know, it was weird. I was at my mom's house, like the house I grew up in, and my mom was like Kris Jenner, and I had 3 sisters.
Already sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it was bad. I didn't feel good about it in my dream. And we had a female robot human thing in our house.
Okay, female robot human thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a robot. But it looked human, but like a robot.
Did it look like it was part of the family? Like, what was its role?
No, it definitely wasn't. They knew, like, we all knew it was like a robot, and they were so excited about it, and I was not. And then they left, and I was there, and the thing started multiplying. Ugh. And then Did
you see it multiply, or was it just like appearing?
Like,
was there a process to the multiplication?
No, I wasn't like. Yeah,
Wait, was it was it being born out of itself, like Greek mythology?
Like the substance.
Was it building its new versions of itself?
No, all of a sudden, just like more and more appeared.
Horrifying.
But when you have like I dream a lot, but like when I wake up, it's like, was that what that was? And you start to think about it, and then as the day goes on, you just forget details. And so much has already gone away.
You think that's how they make the Kardashians in real life? Like, are they just...
Yeah, probably.
And I'm talking about like childbearing, but like they physically are like multiplying somehow, cloning themselves.
Yeah, robots.
Because they keep changing their appearance.
Yeah.
That might not be surgery or adrenochrome. It might be that they are cloning in some laboratory.
I've seen conspiracies that like people, like there are different versions of like Chloe or Kim, and
they look so different.
Yeah.
Can surgery do? Yeah, I guess surgery could do that much work, but
yeah,
I believe it's more than surgery. I think they're getting cloned.
Maybe they're like part AI now.
Well, that's what I was saying when you talked about the dream earlier. Is you probably had that dream because you saw the thirst trap robot photo shoot that Kim Kardashian just had with.
But like, why did that stay in my brain? Like, it wasn't that exciting. I wasn't like titillated by it.
Titillated. AI titillation. I don't know. It might be one of those things that just found its way into the corner of your brain, and your brain was like, "I'm going to now scare you in your sleep."
Yeah.
Those are weird photos. I guarantee you, Kim Kardashian will be the first celebrity to marry a robot.
Good for
publicly. Because it's probably already happened secretly.
I mean,
Good for her.
Yeah, good for her.
You think robots should get married? I'm racist against robots, so I don't know. I'm totally against robots.
I'm one of those annoying people who's like, love is love.
No. I reject that totally. And when it comes to robots, especially.
I mean, I would be for it just to see the experiment happen.
If my kid came home with a robot,
it'd be over.
It'd be over.
It's gonna.
I know. We should be prepared because this is gonna happen, and that's the future. They're gonna fight for robots to be able to vote and to get married. And
what's gonna be sad is like when your child falls in love with like an AI thing and then realizes it's not actually human, and then they're like devastated. And how are we gonna have that
It's like the movie Her. I mean, there's a lot of movies where like people fall in love with robots, and actually there are people today who have married robots.
Like who?
They're in Japan.
Oh. I don't care about those people.
Okay, this is a whole other issue, Alex. You think I'm bad about robots? Well, that's a weird dream.
Yeah. Anyway,
and I hope you.
Thanks for listening.
I hope you're cured of your Kardashian ailments. I would hate to dream about them. I
think
they're satanic witches who drink the blood of children, which is why we have our guest today, everyone.
Okay.
We have an awesome guest. I've done his show. Two of his shows. Just recently, I did his show, Sound Science, where I got to talk about music. A lot of my favorite albums. That was a lot of fun. But now we're going to talk about a lot of interesting stuff that I don't know too much about, but he does. So let's bring on Paranoid American. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm ready to rip open the wound and get into some adrenochrome.
So Wikipedia told me that adrenochrome is a fringe theory that I should probably just not pay any attention to. Is that true?
Maybe, maybe a little bit of yes, a little bit of no. There's a little bit of both columns in this one.
Okay.
Although, this is what piqued my interest the most was the lady doth protest too much. That was sort of the summary of me getting into this because it's very similar to Satanic Panic in that way, where you start doing
Yeah.
just the smallest amount of research and everything that you run into says turn back. This is all BS. Don't
Right.
even read about this. This is fringe.
Right. Yeah. So what was it that got you into this?
I was working on a comic book, and the premise was that a bunch of teens order adrenochrome off of the dark web, and it shows up. And then I was like, okay, and then what? Do they smoke it? Do they snort it? Do they inject it?
Right.
Has anyone actually done any of this before? Is there a record? I go on Aroid forums, like, what are the actual reported effects? I kind of knew what some of the rumored effects were,
Right.
but clearly it's a real chemical. So someone out there must has experimented with it, so there had to be some kind of documentation, right? And that's kind of where I got into it. Was I'm just going to write a short story, and then realized how much of my information was just surface level.
Yeah, because so there is an actual compound, right? That's adrenochrome.
Yeah, it's actually in your blood right now. Don't
Right.
be alarmed.
Oh.
But
Oh boy.
when your body produces adrenaline for any reason, once it realizes it doesn't need that adrenaline, it starts to decompose, it starts to oxidize, and one of those byproducts is adrenaline. And then it's just a natural process that you will find it in everybody's blood. It doesn't
Right.
just have to be children's blood.
Right. And that's why Joe Biden was sniffing people.
Right. Well, I don't know if it gets activated through the olfactory route,
Okay.
although that it is also criminally under sort of reported, and there's not a lot of information about any sort of medical benefits to it, even though it showed lots of promise for the last century. I mean, it was discovered in the 1930s, so we are on like 100 years
Wow.
of knowing about it, yet very little has really been looked into in like a medical or a scientific context since maybe the 60s or 70s.
Can you talk about how it was discovered? Like, how do you even find such a thing?
Well, this is kind of weird, right? So there's a lot of conspiratorial motifs that pop up a lot in adrenochrome research. One of these is the symbol of the rabbit, and we can
Okay.
get into all the different facets of this, but
Yeah.
coincidentally, adrenochrome was sort of discovered without a name at first when someone was doing research on rabbits' adrenaline, and they noticed that it went from a clear liquid, and then once it was exposed to either air or in some of the research, silver oxide, I believe, or silver iodide, that once it was introduced to this, then they would watch the adrenaline go from a clear liquid to a red to a dark purple liquid. So this first observation, followed by another maybe 10 years of research from the early 30s into the early 40s, adrenochrome comes to be known as the color of your adrenals because it turned adrenaline from clear to red.
Oh, whoa. Who's doing this? Like, where was that happening?
The first one that I came across was a guy named Dr. Ernst Friedman. This was in 1933. He was the one that was doing these experiments on rabbits, circulatory systems, and I mean, for lack of a better word, just kind of poking and prodding at rabbits to see like what happens if I poke it over here. Like
Right.
there was some aspect of that, and then the actual process of oxidizing adrenaline to see what the byproducts were started to be investigated by these two guys, Ball and Chen, in 1933. And then finally in 1937, Derek Green and Richter, they actually name it adrenochrome. So as far as I can tell, that is the first time it officially gets its name, or any name, is in 1937. So even that fact right there kind of blew my mind because I figured adrenochrome came about in the 50s or the 60s.
Right, because people, they can look at various things in popular culture that reference it. You know, Hunter S. Thompson comes up a bunch, I think. I think he wrote about it in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So, you know, people were like, oh, these people might have known for a long time that this has been around. And I guess they're referencing, you know, something that's been in the culture for decades prior.
Well, all roads in this regard lead to Aldous Huxley. So
right.
the first big mention is in Doors of Perception, and Doors of Perception didn't necessarily put adrenochrome on the map. It just happened to list adrenochrome right alongside LSD, and mescaline. And one of the interesting facts here is that the person that introduced Aldous Huxley to mescaline, unless you believe the Aleister Crowley theories, but those ones are less substantiated, but that it was introduced to Aldous Huxley by a guy named Dr. Humphrey Osmond in 1953. And that this Dr. Humphrey Osmond also coincidentally happened to be one of the only people on the planet doing adrenochrome research at that same time. So in this case, Doors of Perception, kind of just as a footnote, mentions adrenochrome alongside the psychedelics of mescaline. And that, I think, is where it got its rise, because then it gets mentioned by Anthony Burgess in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
It then gets adopted by Stanley Kubrick into the movie of Clockwork Orange. Following that, there's a few other short stories that it gets mentioned in. And then it hits the Fear and Loathing. And I think once Fear and Loathing hits the big screen in the 90s with Johnny Depp, that's when it really explodes. That's when it almost becomes a household name, because in that movie, they explain adrenochrome as, here's these two guys that are in Vegas doing every drug you've ever heard of, an entire, briefcase full of drugs. Yet adrenochrome knocks Johnny on his ass. It knocks both of them on their ass.
Right.
So it makes an impact of like, wow, these hardened drug veterans, they can barely handle their adrenochrome. I wonder what that's all about. And in that book too, they also conflate a lot that the best place to get adrenochrome are through these Satanists, which actually dates into the book. The book goes way more in depth about how they only the Satanists could come across dead bodies, and it had to be a fresh dead body, and who else would you get this from? Of course, it would be a Satanist.
That's right. Yeah, he says, yeah, it won't work if it won't work from a corpse. You got to be alive. But Hunter, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't in his, quote unquote nonfiction. So I wonder, because he at one point in another, I think in an article, he said that a politician, someone running for president, was taking Ibogaine. Do you know about that story? And
I don't know the story. I know what Ibogaine is.
Yeah, but it was just a total fabrication, and everyone believed that the politician was now addicted to Ibogaine or whatever it is. But it was totally made up. So I wonder what the perception was for people. Did people believe the adrenochrome stuff in Fear and Loathing? They just thought it made sense, and this is a real thing we can find.
I mean, I think so, and it kind of is. It kind of is a real thing that you really can find, and it wasn't. This is another weird twist and turn of this adrenochrome story, because he gets credit in his Fear and Loathing as the one that kind of introduces it as this drug, specifically relating to blood magic in some ways and sacrifice, and all of the weird connotations you get from the QAnon theories. A lot of it gets attributed to him, but he was just kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, because there were at least 2 or 3 other literary works that went way more in depth and made very specific claims. For example, there was a short story called Blood of a Wig that was by Terry something or other. I'll remember his name as I'm talking about him. But in this short story, Terry Southern, you might know him from Easy Rider and Saturday Night Live, and he was kind of a mover and shaker. He wrote for High Times. He was sort of a counterculture writer at this time. He writes a story called Blood of a Wig, and it's about 2 guys that are going to break into an insane asylum and extract blood from one of the patients there, because he's got adrenochrome in his blood. And the thought in the context of the story was that if they do a blood transfusion, if they put this schizophrenic patient's blood into their body, then they will temporarily get to feel what it's like to be schizophrenic through the high levels of adrenochrome. And this itself, I mean, this is a fictional story about these 2 guys. This itself is based on that same research, that after someone discovers what adrenochrome is in the 1930s, they start testing levels for it in human blood. And they do find in these insane asylums and these, criminal prisons, that those that were diagnosed with having schizophrenia had much higher levels of adrenochrome in their blood at any given time. We're talking 4 to 6 to 10 times the amount of adrenochrome. So this starts to form a theory that was espoused by lots of scientists at that time, that it was this sort of toxin X, that it was a chemical that if it's in your body, you act crazy, you have schizophrenia, and then if you could just filter it out or reduce the levels, then you no longer have schizophrenia.
Right.
That's not necessarily true, but that was the original premise, and that's where the Blood of a Wig came from, and that's where every other story came from. That's this weird mythological substance that's in your blood.
It sounds like something the government would want to harvest. and use?
Well, funny enough, if you look at the research, right? Like I mentioned, it's found in the 1930s. You see a whole bunch of research going into it, 1930s, 1940s. And then for some weird reason, between the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, it just disappears off the map. And
Interesting.
maybe it's just a coincidence that this goes right alongside MK Ultra programs where they were fascinated with any kind of psychedelic. How can we weaponize psychedelics?
Yep.
And imagine outside of DMT, someone's like, well, you've got a psychedelic in your blood right now. How can we weaponize that? So maybe that's part of the reason that we don't see a lot of adrenochrome research for about 3 decades.
So you said Crowley wrote about it when you were talking about before Burgess. Is that right?
No, I mentioned that the person that introduced Aldous Huxley to mescaline was this guy, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who was his name is on all of these early adrenochrome papers. I was just kind of making a side note that that is the official story of how Aldous Huxley first came across mescaline. There are some stories that he met up with Aleister Crowley and got mescaline from him maybe like 3 or 4 years prior to that. But the official story is that from Doors of Perception. That's what caused him to write Doors of Perception, was the same guy that just coincidentally happened to be the world's foremost adrenochrome research scientist.
And what was coming out of that relationship or that writing? Like, what were they saying around that time about adrenochrome?
Adrenochrome at that point, it was just sort of a weaker form of mescaline. It was just being mentioned alongside all of these other psychedelic, these novel new chemicals that could alter the human brain, and it was mentioned alongside of those, but doesn't ever really get the focus until it gets featured in these short stories like Blood of a Wig. There was also a story called The Winter Market, or it was a collection of short stories called The Winter Market by the same guy that wrote Necromancer, William Gibson. He's like, fairly well known for Necromancer. He also writes specifically about oxidized adrenaline turning into adrenochrome, and that if you can't figure out how to get this adrenochrome out of your system, then you'll turn into a schizophrenic. So this becomes a literary device of a secular way to introduce schizophrenia into people, which prior to this, you see the same claims made, but usually those claims have a supernatural element of blood magic, or there's some sort of like a demonic quality to something. Well, now we have a secular chemical version of, you could almost equate it to like blood libel. You could say that now blood libel has actually been crystallized into a substance that you can sell and shoot and trade with people.
Oh man. So where are you with this? Like, do you think, because like people who might be listening might have only heard about adrenochrome through like, theories about the Clintons, or very strange fringe theories, or perhaps if you're like me, not so fringe. Where do you fall with it today?
I'm very much a skeptic of anything supernatural, so a lot of the claims about being able to live forever or like rejuvenating qualities and that I don't give a lot of credit into. I think that they're interesting, they're fun theories. I like watching Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but I don't believe everything that actually happened in that movie verbatim, like that's actual retelling of reality in any way. But again, like I mentioned, there's this aspect of don't look into that. Don't even read about it. It's all fringe. If you ask any of the LLM models, if you ask any like Wikipedia official sources, they'll all basically, before they tell you what it is, they'll be like, this is debunked pseudoscience. This is conspiracy. It's like, I was just asking about a chemical. I just want the objective facts about a chemical. Why does it always have to come with 4 hours worth of disclaimers to make sure I don't get radicalized by just looking into this.
Right.
So that part did make me want to look into it more. So if you look at the original people that looked into this, it was Humphrey Osmond, and the person that he was working with was another guy that ended up being the father to fortifying cereal vitamins. So when you see those, this is going to sound like a weird connection here, but when you see those videos where someone crushes up Cheerios in like a Ziploc bag and then they put a magnet to it and they're like, look what they're doing to our bodies. They're filling us up with magnets for, some unknown reason. Well, that's actually part of this fortification strategy that was developed by a guy named Dr. Abram Hoffer, who worked alongside Osmond and another guy named John Smithies. These are like the trifecta of names, is Osmond, Smithies, and Hoffner. And Abram Hoffer, through this fortification of cereals, that was actually a result of someone that he came across a young kid that would have these schizophrenic bouts, and they kind of pinpointed it as being related to folic acid. He was eating, like every time he ate an apple, he would have like a schizophrenic episode. And over time, he realizes, long story short, poor people aren't getting enough nutrients. So if we just buff up their cereal with vitamin B12 and niacin and like iron and all these other things that they're not getting because they're not eating proper meals, they're just eating cereal, which is not a proper meal to nourish a
What?
kid, then maybe we can alleviate some of these issues like schizophrenia. And through his research into schizophrenia and how to combat it, this is kind of where he gets steered into the adrenochrome research. And this dovetails to, I don't know the best way to segue this. This dovetails directly into Scottish Rite 33rd degree, like a fund that they were also looking into schizophrenia and adrenochrome, and it just happened to be the perfect storm that they were already looking into schizophrenia. The Scottish Rite was like, "Hey, we've got a big old bag of money for anyone that wants to look into schizophrenia," and the two just meet, and
Really?
the rest is kind of history.
Well, what do they do from there?
So the Scottish Rite takes an interest in this because at the time in the early 1900s, they kind of umbrellaed all mental illnesses under this huge concept of dementia praecox, meaning early onset dementia. Meaning, if grandpa gets dementia, it's like, okay, well, he's old, right? Like old people, they go crazy after a while, they get dementia. We don't know what to do about it. It's just a fact of life. However, if your 20-year-old kid develops dementia and they start acting schizophrenic, now it becomes a concern because they don't necessarily know exactly what causes it. And more importantly, they want to figure out how to eradicate it. You want to make sure that the person you're passing your entire lineage to isn't a schizophrenic before they're even old enough to start establishing themselves in the world and carry on your legacy. So very much in an elitist point of view, it's a self-serving, like, how do I fix this? I need to pass the legacy on to the kid. The kid's going crazy.
Right.
This is essentially when the Scottish Rite says, well, let's investigate the human brain. Let's figure out what exactly is happening to cause schizophrenia in certain people. And they put together a huge fund, the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction in particular. They put together this huge fund, and they just start bankrolling anyone that looks into any kind of schizophrenic research. And a lot of that ends up dovetailing directly into adrenochrome specific research because of the findings of Osmond, Smithies, and Hoffer.
Are there any examples of success stories of extracting schizophrenia?
Not necessarily. That they were onto something that was defined by Carl Jung, mentioned something called toxin X.
Okay.
And he theorized that there was some sort of a chemical that the body itself would produce. And once it starts producing this, it would be the cause of schizophrenia. And that if you could stop the brain from producing it, or again, if you could filter it out from the bloodstream, then you could solve schizophrenia, as if it were like a hat you could put on and take back off. And this is, I believe, the basis for a lot of even the modern day claims of the elites go and they drink adrenochrome or adrenalized blood, and they trip out, and maybe they live, and the wrinkles kind of like just melt away on the spot. A lot of that is this same thinking of, oh, if we can just put a chemical into my body or filter a chemical out of my body, then you'll have these instant changes. What they found is that it's not necessarily as straightforward as that.
Yep.
And more likely, the high levels of adrenochrome in someone's blood was more of an indicator. It was an indicator that they were going through a schizophrenic episode, much less that the adrenochrome itself was causing that schizophrenia. And there are lots of studies that get really interesting and controversial as you look into all of this. That continues all the way into the mid 90s.
I want to hear some of those if you can, but real quick, I just want to say, like, this idea of the fountain of youth is something that's in human nature. Like, there's so many stories about this idea of finding something, right, that can replenish your age, make you younger. And just when you were saying that, it made me think of the story of Elizabeth Bathory. You know about her? Isn't she the one that
Right, the lady that would bathe in the blood of her servants for rejuvenating purposes, right? And again, I would say that all of those versions of blood magic, and you could usually tie a lot of that into kind of blood libel charges as well, because it usually has to do with children, usually like virgin children
Innocent
or Christian children, and then that their blood is somehow more magical than anyone else's blood, and then therefore this rejuvenating properties. I think that adrenochrome doesn't create those. It just became the new medium for what might otherwise feel like outdated claims. Well,
Right.
now there's this new chemical version of it that everything old is new again because we've got like a new medium for it.
Right. So you were saying about these experiments that were up to the 90s, I believe. Can you
Yeah,
share some of
well,
those?
we'll skip right to, I guess, the most interesting part of this is that Dr. Abram Hoffer, after literally like 60 years of his life, is dedicated towards looking into this adrenochrome since he had found it. His first studies were in the 1950s, and then he releases a paper in 1994. So at the very least, 4 decades of research, and it's called The Benefits of Adrenochrome, and it's piggybacking on top of a paper that he continuously developed and republished called the schizophrenia hypothesis, or the adrenochrome hypothesis of schizophrenia, which again was based on that premise that somehow adrenochrome was causing schizophrenia. Well, in his 1994 paper, he makes some very specific claims, and the claims are more about having schizophrenia in your family line more so than adrenochrome as a substance. He gets into that, and I'll mention some of the interesting points. But if you were to conflate schizophrenia and adrenochrome, because that's what the basis for this funding and research was, he makes a claim that this might sound outlandish, but he says that during the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, that a large number of people that survived that were more likely than not to have schizophrenia in their family line, and that if you were to oversimplify all of humanity into 2 buckets, and you said you're either a cancer person or you're a dementia person, like clearly people can have both, they can have neither, but if you were to create those 2 camps, he claims that there's not necessarily an advantage in having schizophrenia yourself, but if your parents had it or if your grandparents had it, meaning it's like somehow a recessive gene, if you were to look at it that way, that there's benefits because the first order of relatives of these patients, parents, children, siblings of schizophrenics, they do have markable advantages compared to those that don't. For example, and he lists these: more youthful appearance, less gray hair as you age, more ability to tolerate pain, more resistance to bacterial infections, and they even go into doing studies of lung cancer and other forms of malignant cancer. And they make the claim that, for example, those that have schizophrenia in their family line have less bouts with lung cancer, and the ones that do have bouts with any kind of cancer, they tend to actually be able to be resolved and they can go into remission. Whereas people that do not have schizophrenia in their family line, they more typically have chronic forms of cancer, like cancer that keeps coming back and does not go away. And that this, along with intellectual, he also equates people that have schizophrenia in their family line tend to be artistic musicians, like kind of original thinkers. He's kind of really selling on having schizophrenics in your family line.
Great.
And then he goes on to mention how this relates to adrenochrome. And one of those is a study where he found what you would call an LSD hardhead. It's someone that they could just straight up inject with massive amounts of LSD, and the person just did not have the subjective experience that most people report from taking LSD. However, the moment they introduced adrenochrome in addition to this LSD, now the person is having the exact same subjective experience that you would expect.
Whoa.
So he starts tying these dots of, well, maybe it's not adrenochrome, but more than that, maybe it's not even LSD that's making someone have these experiences. It's a combination of the two, that if you didn't have adrenochrome in your blood, then psychedelics might not even affect you at all. And this is where you can almost rewind and see maybe the military would have a use for this, knowing that this substance almost acts as an on-off binary switch for whether or not you're going to have a psychedelic experience on any platform.
Wow. So I just want to rehash what you're saying really quick. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying schizophrenia is good for you, and we should all hopefully have it because it'll keep us looking young. And
you want
protect
grandma
us.
and grandpa to have it. You don't want to have it. Maybe your parents, if you're comfortable with it being that close to you. But that you want it to be in your family line, but not in you personally.
Okay.
And even in that case, it's more. It's not like you want it. It's just that statistically and based on his research, you would be more resistant to cancer and more resistant to things like the bubonic plague and bacterial infection. and even showing signs of old age by simply having schizophrenia in your family. And now,
Wow.
if you tie in that the only reason that any of these scientists cared about adrenochrome was because of its relation to schizophrenia, now you can start to see where those dots connect, where, okay, well, if having schizophrenia in my family line is somehow better for me in the long run or my progeny, well, then maybe if there were a way to just inject adrenochrome into me directly and that would cause schizophrenia, one of the analogies that I make, not Dr. Abram Hoffer, but it almost sounds like going to the gym for being crazy. So the
Yeah.
closer you can bring yourself to the brink of being schizophrenic
Right.
and not falling in and then easing yourself back and going back into normalcy, if you can continuously do this, just like you'd go to the gym and lift weights and break those muscle fibers just to get stronger the next time, if you can continuously put yourself into these schizophrenia inducing moments and not fall all the way over, you're kind of building up a resistance, not just to being an actual schizophrenic, but you might actually be fighting off cancer and bacterial infection.
Wow.
Again, it might sound outlandish, but this is the culmination of this guy's over 4 decades of research. And again, this was not a fringe random scientist that only looked into adrenochrome. He is literally the person responsible for putting niacin and iron in your Cheerios.
So that's the story of my life, just balancing on the edge of schizophrenia. I have it in my family, and when I was, there's that, they say there's an age where you might, it might start showing signs. I was always like, oh, am I gonna make it or not? Because I have some pretty wild cousins who have been in prison their whole life for schizophrenic outbursts. But while you're talking about that breaking the mind thing, it made me think of, and we're talking about like government experiments, MK Ultra, kind of makes me think of like some of the experiments that went wrong allegedly with someone like Jolly West, right? And he would it seemed like he would break people's minds while performing MK Ultra experiments. There's that guy in the book Chaos by Tom O'Neill who might have murdered or he did murder a little kid while on some perhaps MK Ultra bender. The guy who jumped out of the window,
And Dr. Frank Olson.
Thank you, Dr. Frank Olson, and then there's the other person I'm thinking of, I'm spacing on right now, that Jolly West visited, the guy who shot Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby.
Oh,
and there's
it was
even some
Jack
claims
Ruby.
of Timothy McVeigh, but yeah.
Yes. So maybe there's something there too of like, all of this stuff is like always a war on how we view reality and on our brains. So it seems like all of this is the ingredients of our government's favorite stuff when it's playing with our minds.
The scariest part for me of all of Dr. Jolly West's research is that he sort of concluded that the most effective form of mind control and to break someone and to instill, the multiple personalities, all of that, is just simple sleep deprivation, and it doesn't even require more than about 3 days worth.
Yep.
So all of the exotic chemicals and psychedelics and torture techniques pale in comparison to just not letting someone get a good night's sleep for about 3 days.
Yep.
Once you get them past those initial 72 hours of not having good sleep, you can basically influence them as much as you could on any drug known to man.
So mothers.
So yeah, so mothers,
Right.
Alex.
That explains everything.
Is that why my wife is like that? That's fascinating. We have a 7-month-old and haven't been sleeping much.
But and I have another. This is I don't hear this one brought up at all in adrenochrome, and I don't even know if there even is adrenochrome research. It almost just sounds like people repeat crazy conspiracy theories they read online, and they count that.
We're
as
doing
research,
it right now.
but
Yeah,
we are doing that right now. One of those aspects of research, though, is that they concluded fairly early on in these 1930s, 1940s research that adrenochrome might not be the cause. It's somehow related to schizophrenia, but it's not the cause, because even if you get into low levels or if you take it out and you put it in someone else's body, it doesn't have the effects they expected it to. So plan B was literally just eugenics. Plan B was, well, if we can't solve it chemically, then the only way to deal with this dementia praecox from your 20-year-old progeny not being able to carry on the legacy is to simply weed them out. Just make sure that they don't procreate with anybody else.
Yeah.
And you'll see the Huxley family, again, Aldous Huxley is the one that introduces this to the rest of the world through Osmond. And the Huxleys, even to this day, if you look at the Huxley Foundation, it's kind of repurposed a little bit, but it's straight up eugenics.
Straight up.
And this is based on maybe a self-preservation thing. It's like, I want to make sure that you don't have kids because I see that you're crazy, and I don't want my great-great-grandkids to, even by chance, mate with your great-great-grandkids, knowing that they might become schizophrenic, and now they won't be able to pass on my legacy generations removed.
Right.
So the only solution for that is to remove you from the gene pool.
Right.
And now you've got the Rockefeller Foundation, the Macy Foundation, and I guess to add a little bit of fire to this is that as soon as the Scottish Rite funding, I wouldn't say dries up, but once that stops, the baton gets passed directly to the CIA and to these Rockefeller foundations. So now it goes from publicly funded, the results being, published publicly, to now it's all secretive.
Just south of where I lived most of my life when I was in New York was Cold Spring Harbor, where they had a whole eugenicist facility I think from the 30s is when it started, maybe earlier. But when you were saying initially about the Scottish Rite stuff, that foundation, I was thinking like it's like schizophrenic eugenics, because they want to. But I guess they didn't care to have their descendants have a little bit of schizophrenia to ward off cancer. If only they knew.
No, well, that was the hypothesis put forth by Dr. Abram Hoffer in '94.
If only they knew.
And there are very little people that agree with anything that he put out about adrenochrome. But and this is what's kind of crazy to me. This is that lady doth protest too much dynamic that made me continuously interested in this. Is that even in his reports, while he was being funded by the Scottish Rite publicly, and he's actually documenting this and publishing his findings, he makes a note that he finds it odd. He keeps finding resistance among all his peers. That once he brings up this concept of adrenochrome, all of his peers, they immediately try and discount it. They immediately try and disprove everything he's doing. And he makes a very specific note that those that are the biggest naysayers, they tend to not have any of the research themselves. They don't go out and try and synthesize adrenochrome. They just read what he was putting out and say, nuh-uh, that doesn't make sense. That's not true. And that the people that do actually extract adrenochrome from adrenaline and test it on animals and test it on even themselves and their wives and their colleagues, that they all report a unequivocal, objective experience, like an actual psychedelic experience, mind-changing, versus the rest of the establishment that just says, no, that's impossible. And that continues even now today. Even when he published that in 1994, it was just like, oh, come on, please. We can look back 30 years and find people that were saying that your research amounted to nothing and that it was basically all made up or just incorrectly done.
Do you think they're doing stuff today with adrenochrome?
From everything that I've read so far, it seems that we've just got way too many better alternatives. Like if you wanted a psychedelic experience of some kind, there's easier ways that'll get you directly from point A to point B than going through adrenochrome. And again, a lot of these studies tended to show that adrenochrome was more of a catalyst or almost like a precursor to a psychedelic experience, not in and of itself. And one of those in particular is Dr. Abram Hoffer does bring a bunch of adrenochrome home to his wife and to his friends, and they all try it out on each other. They take it sublingually, they put it under their tongue, and within minutes, they all start writing down on this little like checklist of, okay, am I hearing voices? Am I seeing things? Do I feel inebriated? And they go through and they basically realize across the board, it has the exact same effects as mescaline, just far less pronounced. It's just a lot weaker version of maybe what you do with mescaline. And there's another substance that after adrenochrome itself continues to break down in the body, it creates something called angiolutin. And angiolutin, they mention, was even less useful to research for the opposite reason, that one of the testers would try it and they would basically have a psychedelic experience that could last up to 2 weeks. And that the length and the intensity of this experience made it less valuable of a research tool, because if you want to do some research and you're like, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks from now when I'm back to normal, it's not as conducive to doing your job. So, and this one has been described as a goldish greenish liquid. So I just have to throw it out there because there was a small moment in time when the same adrenochrome conspiracy claims were being tossed around. There was also one, this chick from Orange is the New Black, and she mentioned that she's at this Hollywood party, and they asked her, did you drink the gold juice or the green gold juice? And that was exactly where my mind went. It was like there actually is precedent for this adrenochrome adjacent angelitin that does have these properties of you would trip for 2 weeks if you even took it.
Dude, I think they're totally doing this still. Like I don't know about the experiment stuff, but I feel like they're out there doing this. Just because we know they do so much. Like when I say they, the elites, who knows, these like crazy, insane people with lots of money, they go to great lengths to do the most depraved stuff. It's like, why wouldn't they do
Well,
something
another
like this?
analogy that I bring up sometimes, and when this comes up, is there is a certain meal that I think it's an orphan bunting, where they sort of feed this little orphan bunting, a small little bird. This is like a band practice. This is like a black mark. You got to get invited to a restaurant after they close in Paris at like 3 a.m. But they basically drown a little bird in cognac. I'm gonna make some of this up. They drown like a bird in cognac and they like flash fire it and they serve it to you. And the way that you're supposed to eat it is you put a napkin over your head to hide your shame from God because of this like horrible cruelty that this animal goes through. And then they take the entire orphan bunting, the entire bird, beak, feathers, feet, bones, everything in whole, put it in their mouth and just crunch down and chew the bones and swallow it whole. And the reason that I usually bring this up as an analogy is like, it might not even taste good, right? But someone out there is like, have you had orphan bunting? Oh, it's like $50,000 a dish. You might get arrested if you try it. There's someone that's like, oh, now I really need to do that. And in that same case, someone could tell you, man, there's this great LSD or this great synthetic, and you can trip for this amount of time, and it's so easy. And they're like, well, what's the most the most outlandish form of this? Oh, well, there is this adrenochrome stuff, and of course, someone out there would be like, I'm willing to try that just for the experience, just to say that I did it one time. So it's impossible to discount that aspect, that someone would go to the lengths.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily know if all of the properties ascribed to it are factual.
Right. Yeah. I mean, who knows? You know, the schizophrenic part of my brain is just like they've synthesized it and they're putting in us and they're sprinkling it from the sky, and everyone in the military is getting it injected into them. That seems about right.
Another part of this is that so much of the research says that it's never been a psychedelic. That's the fringe part. If you ask an AI or a Grok or any LLM, or you just do a modicum of research from typical sources, it will say that part is completely made up, that it's not schizophrenic. However, there is a video, a declassified MK Ultra video from I think 1955 that specifically states that adrenochrome is a psychedelic. And if you were to, you can go and find this on archive.org now, but the video title is called Experimental Compound MER17. And MER17 is actually a substance called Frenquil. And during MK Ultra, MER17, they were looking at this as an antidote for all psychedelics, so that if you were unwittingly dosed by enemy forces and you realize, oh my god, they gave me LSD or mescaline or whatever, you could take some of this MER17 to counteract the effects, and then you could sober up again. Or more likely, you would keep acting like you were under the influence, but you'd actually be sober, so you can kind of like turn it around on them. In this video presentation that is being given to these like CIA field agents, they specifically cite MER17 as combating the effects of adrenochrome. So clearly there is documented record of the CIA considering adrenochrome not only to be psychedelic, but that they have found an antidote for how psychedelic adrenochrome was. It's just one extra bit of evidence where clearly the government did consider it psychedelic, and even so much as they were trying to find antidotes for it. Yet now in 2025, most research will say that's not true, that no one has ever considered it a psychedelic outside of fringe.
So interesting. So interesting. Well, let's leave adrenochrome for now and segue into another dark aspect of American life, and that is Disney. So you were an illustrator for Disney, huh?
Animator.
Animator,
Yeah.
sorry.
I did specifically, without getting into like all the different qualifiers, I did digital animation for Disney, a lot of it being in Maya, After Effects, and then ultimately writing lots of custom nerdy scripts that would automatically do all kinds of parallax animation. And I won't bore you with the fine details, but essentially digital animator.
That's wild. What was it like? I mean, you were there for how long?
10 years. It was 2006 to 2016.
Wow.
I loved it. I gotta say, right off the bat, it was underpaid because Disney knows how much of a privilege it is to just have their name on your resume and to work with
Right.
some of the IP you get
That's
to work with.
bullshit.
Yeah, that
And
sucks though.
in exchange, they just don't pay you a whole lot of money in order to do that. But I loved all 10 years of that. I got to go and jump onto the rock and roller coaster at lunch if I was like feeling a little bit sleepy.
That's awesome.
Could just hop into the park. Like
That's
the park
wild.
was literally like less than a 3-minute walk from my desk once I got out of the office.
Wow. That's wild. Were you a Disney fan prior?
Not really, no. In fact, I thought most Disney adults were creepy and still kind
Well, they
of
are.
are.
Oh, they are. Yeah,
Although
that's true.
I'm not against roller coasters and rides,
Yeah.
but no, I would definitely not consider myself a Disney enthusiast. Even while I was working there, I got to work tangentially on some Monsters Inc. like Monster University stuff and Cars
Love
stuff.
that.
And I didn't even watch those movies when they were out,
Funny.
even though I was kind of working on them in ways. I felt it was like too juvenile for me at
That's
the time.
funny. I'm not a Disney adult, but I do like Mary Poppins. I always like the ingenuity behind Mary Poppins, and like I don't know much about Walt. I mean, I know some things, but I always just like what went into that movie and the way he thought about the animatronic bird that sings and stuff, and it's just really interesting stuff. And just I like that overall story. You know,
I
some
see her
people-
as a villain, by the way. Mary
That's funny.
Poppins.
You do.
If you rewatch that movie,
She's an
right
angel.
after she shows these kids this completely different reality, right? Where
Yep.
2D and 3D mesh, and you can talk to cartoon animals, and she brings them back. And as soon as she brings them back, she immediately starts gaslighting them. They start talking about, wow, that was so fun, Mary Poppins. It's so crazy that we got to go and dance with penguins. And she starts saying, what are you guys talking about? That didn't happen. None of that happened. I can't get over that. Is one of the most insidious characters
That's hilarious.
in Disney history because of that.
I see her as an angel who came back to help a broken family and teach the children imagination, and then heal the family with because the father was this banker who had a horrible job with a horrible boss, and the reward at the end of that movie is the family coming back together despite him not having a job anymore. And then he gets his job back, and it's like a little extra happiness, but the family unit is happy together. I always like that. Whereas the remake they did a few years ago was like totally horrible and evil, and it was like it was inverted happiness. Him getting his job back was the true happiness, and then he gets his family back. I'm like, I hate that, but I like that take though. I hear
We
that
could
a
debate
lot.
that a little bit, just because even in the original Mary Poppins, this is the family outsourcing compassion and care for their own children to
Yeah.
the hired help, and
Yeah.
and they don't even do a background check on the hired help to know that she literally came in on a flying broom.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in the beginning of that story, except I mean the kids too, are bad characters.
Well, you could say the magic kind of, washed over their brains, right?
Maybe, yeah.
MK Ultra,
Gaslit
yeah.
by
Exactly.
magic.
And
But like,
the neighbor is some kind of like an imperialist sort of adventurer that mentions that he's going out looking for Hottentots. Like it's a
amazing.
very controversial.
Well, it's
movie in
British, isn't it,
2025.
though?
yeah, it's amazing. He's got a cannon on his roof.
Yeah.
He's constantly like fighting some invisible enemy. He's the symbol of the decline of the British Empire. And the mom is like a caricature of a suffragette. Like she's clearly a bad mom because of her bad ideology. It's kind of making fun of the suffragette movement and through that
100%.
character.
Yeah, great observation. That's very prominent in the movie if you rewatch it.
Oh yeah, and then she gets a redemption arc in the end. But what you're saying about the kids and their help being outsourced falls in line with the characters being bad in the beginning. And I always like that Poppins brings in like the fun of an imagination, but also structure for the children and how to go back and forth between the two to be in the real world. Whereas there was none of that allowed in their life, in their broken life at home. And then the father kind of goes through his own transformation, understanding what fun is by flying the kite at the end, and then gets like his job back. And it's like happiness, even though it takes like the old man dying, laughing in the air for that to happen. But I always liked that movie. I'm not into a lot of Disney
The
movies.
British have weird humor. Come on.
I love British humor. I love British humor. But Walt wasn't British, right? Was he?
But Mary Poppins is obviously.
No, not at all. He
No.
was, if anything, he was a true red-blooded American
Super.
and maybe even Spanish royalty, depending on how far down that
interesting.
rabbit hole you want to go.
So there's so many theories about Disney. Like, do you have, like, when you were there, were you into
Were
the
there
theories
tunnels?
of Disney at all?
I've seen the tunnels, yeah, but I mean, none of the claims that you see online, I don't have anything that can even compete with some of those most claims. Like, I've seen blood come out of those tunnels. I've seen people get really
What?
hurt, but it's less because they were doing rituals, and it's more because they were underpaying a 17-year-old wearing a huge Mickey outfit, and then they have to run from one side of the park to the other side in this dark, like unlit tunnel, and they just run into each other. And there was like horrible things that would happen in those tunnels,
Whoa.
but not sacrifices. At least not
That you
unless
saw.
unless
They
they're
weren't
paying me to
taking
say that.
kids.
Do you see like occult motifs in Disney films? Like people always
1,000,000%. In fact, I would even make maybe a slightly like out of the norm argument that the earlier Disney movies had the most occultism and they were better for it. And versus the later ones seek to remove a lot of that. For example, the very first feature-length Disney movie is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, topical because they just re-released the live action version of that.
Yeah.
But that original story is really Rosicrucianism. It's all about a human exchanging human knowledge and human experience with earth elementals that go into the ground, and they scavenge up these minerals or these gems. So it's, to them, these gems have no value, but to the humans above ground have all this value. And the only thing that she exchanges is she teaches them to dance and to sing and to clean, which are things that they weren't familiar with. Again, if you're an earth elemental, if you bring it all the way down to like the elemental magic aspect, one of the first things that Snow White does with these seven dwarves is she bathes them. This is their first interaction with another element of water.
Whoa,
So
yeah,
now
yeah.
she's kind of this alchemist that's introducing these new dynamics in these earth elementals that they've never experienced before, and they get addicted to it. And that becomes the entire premise of that entire movie and the rest of the story. And I would even make a really strong argument that Walt, he repopularizes the Grimm's Brothers tales, right?
Yeah.
For a long period of time, their book was only outsold by the Bible. And you could also make a pretty strong argument that you went into someone's house and you see that they've got a Bible and Grimm's fairy tales, more chances that they just have the Bible, because you kind of have to have a Bible in your house for all sorts of reasons, but you might not be reading it every night. If you had kids and Grimm's, you're probably reading that to them constantly, way more than you're reading the Bible, unless you are very, very religious.
Right.
But just because you own those two books, one would get read more than the other. And without Disney sort of repurposing and repopularizing Grimm's fairy tales, you might not have even had the same momentum for this revival of like Germanic romanticism, like this kind of romantic worldview of Germanic paganism and these old folk stories. They would have died out without Grimm, and even with Grimm, they might have lost a little bit of their traction. And I guess the biggest line to draw here is that we might not have had a World War II if it weren't for Disney popularizing globally this Germanic sort of people's history, and that this kind of gives it this insane amount of momentum that now it creates like a monster almost, with how much people are invigorated with these old Germanic tours.
So wait, can you expand on that? Are you saying like that the stuff Disney pumped out was then feeding like the German people's ego?
Absolutely, because the Grimm brothers, before they did Grimm's fairy tales, they were historians. They were writing about the actual history of the Germanic peoples, and it was kind of being lost to time. A lot of this information was not known. The Germans had sort of been losing any sort of national identity at that point. And when the Grimm's fairy tales, they actually were going out into the field and, trekking through woods and knocking on old ladies' doors and saying, "Tell us your stories." And they created this huge index of all the most popular stories, and they kind of combined them to get this cohesive collection of them. And that book itself, because it becomes so popular, this reestablishes this Germanic identity nationally. And now when Disney starts to popularize this, now he's bringing it alive on the screen. They're animated. And this is right at the same point in which the German people are going through yet another identity crisis. So I don't know if you can like run a simulation on a world without Disney and how much
That's
the
amazing.
Germanic
Wow.
peoples, like identify with this new nationalistic worldview. But with Disney in the picture, he definitely adds a little bit of fuel to that fire. And clearly, I mean, objectively, he draws from Grimm's fairy tales for a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
his very early movies.
A ton of stuff, yeah. I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if I dreamt it or if I just misread it, but I'll share it and see if I've heard this story. But um, allegedly, from my memory, Roy and Walt Disney were flying above Florida looking for the land that would become Disneyland on the day JFK was assassinated. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that. I mean, that's actually, I love that part of the lore.
I think I read that somewhere. It's been a really long time since I read that, but I gotta find that. So I'm just throwing it out there, and someone listening can look it up. But it always made sense to me.
Yeah, and the synchromysticism of it all. And actually, that was the building that I worked in Disney was a post-production building. It's called the Roy O. Disney Production Building.
Yeah, because he took over Disney after Walt died, I believe.
Yeah, and Walt kind of lost a little bit of focus because of how many plates that he was keeping spinning in the air for such a long time there.
Yeah. So when it comes to the occult stuff, and you're saying they, I guess, were better at it early on, like what you were saying with Snow White. Do you think Walt was just very conscious of this stuff and putting it in there, or were
Definitely.
there other people?
Yeah, without a question in my mind, because Walt Disney. This is another weird like conspiracy misinfo thing that gets spread. Like, oh, he was a Freemason. Well, I mean, technically, he wasn't because he was actually Demolay. He joined the Demolay when he was about 19 years old.
I don't know what that is.
And so the Demolay, imagine this is like Freemasonry for kids. Before you're old enough to join the real Freemasons, you can join Demolay.
Okay.
It's almost the
ROTC.
same thing as ROTC is a good one. Another good one would be you join the Cub Scouts before you join the Eagle Scouts or something of that nature. And so he not only is he part of Demolay, this sort of Freemasonry for kids, but he is raised and mentored by the guy that founded Demolay, a guy that everyone just called Dad. So this would almost be like, you didn't just learn about mythology and read Joseph Campbell's books. Like Joseph Campbell was your teacher and mentor for 4 or 5 years of your life. So you would have a much different perspective on Joseph Campbell's work if you were dealing with the man himself. So here's Walt Disney being mentored directly by the guy that created the Demolay organization. And their sort of practices, their rituals are very Freemasonic, but even outside of just Freemasonry, they've got all sorts of occult symbolism and lighting candles, and this candle represents a certain, personification of a thought or an ideology, and being able to talk and be so well versed in symbolism. I feel that that's something that Walt never let escape anything that he touched. I think that his whole thing about story and mythology probably was heavily reinforced by his time in Demolay. So it's, in my mind, the earlier stuff was him saying like, here's how I can convey this like deep symbolic meaning that I've had impressed on me through this secret society, but I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. So it's more palatable for the masses.
Is Demolay still around? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. I think just like every other Freemasonic organization, they've kind of tanked in membership from the 50s and 60s were like the heyday. This was part of everyone wanting to join clubs anyways. But then after internet and LinkedIn and insurance companies, there's less and less reason to join any of these.
Right.
So it kind of fizzles out in the same proportions.
Wow. So LinkedIn got rid of like Oddfellows.
Pretty much, man.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, I've been into some Oddfellows buildings as with my death metal band, because it was some of the only places that you could play venues in Oddfellow temples, I guess they are. I don't know what they're called.
Which is not Freemasonic, by the way. It's
Right.
sort of like tangential to it. It's if you don't want to join the Freemasons and you still want to do Freemason type stuff, then you can join the Oddfellows.
It was weird. We played a show in Burlington, Vermont, and it was like just open to us. We had all our little death metal bands play a show, and at some point, I saw in the wall this like secret door thing, like a square, and I'm like, I'm gonna play with that. So I opened it, and there was just a skeleton inside in a casket with a glass thing, and took a picture of myself giving it some beer. That was a big mistake because 2 hours later our van exploded, and I just figured the skeleton.
It was obviously
skeleton
those two
did it.
things are
The
connected.
skeleton did
Dude,
it.
obviously, obviously. So what else with the Disney? Like, so when Walt's doing all this stuff, do you think the American people like are picking up on this at all? Like, were there theories even back then that you know of being like, this guy's interjecting, bad symbolism into our society?
If anything, man, and this is kind of weird how it dovetails into the adrenochrome type research,
Yeah.
but as I'm looking at these old magazine articles and newspaper articles from the early 1900s, one of the things that really made an impression on me is how well versed people then were with these sort of like ancient pagan cults and rituals. Like, you would open up the newspaper and read an article about ancient Babylon and Moloch worship and like, Asherah research. And this was kind of a common water cooler talk. You might be talking about occult topics and Manly Palmer Hall style stuff. Like, this was kind of in vogue at the time. So now, if you look in 1990s or the early 2000s, and someone's like, oh man, this Disney movie is just filled with old pagan and Babylonian rituals. If you made that same claim in the 1930s and 40s, it's like, yeah, no duh, man. That's the reason why we like it, is because it's talking about all of these topics that are already in vogue with us now. So I feel that if anything, people were more accepting and they were more conscious of the occult teachings that were in these early Disney movies than they are now. It feels like they're hidden. And I think that's just because we have less, I guess, familiarity with some of these claims. It usually comes up in like fringe and conspiracy and occult circles versus water cooler talk.
Right. That is very interesting. Where do you think, I guess while you're there as an animator, because a theory is you hear people say like they're sneaking in things. Did you ever see anything like that where someone's sneaking in something?
No, the most salacious thing that I ever saw was that an older gentleman that worked at the park, had a heart attack on the Tower of Terror. Not the ride, like he was the guy that would like tell you which of the elevators to get into.
Yeah.
He had like an episode, and because Disney basically owns their own municipality, they've got their own police force, fire department, their own EMS. They basically send the Disney EMS to scoop this guy up, drive him just off of Disney property, and then declare that he died from a heart attack. And the way they do this is they can say, no one has died on this property. No one's ever died on this ride. Well, technically, if you don't declare them dead until you drive them off property.
Wow.
So, and I usually equate that, like, if you ever seen The Wire and the detectives are constantly fighting when like a body washes up on a shore somewhere and then all of a sudden they're arguing over, well, that's in your jurisdiction. And then another cop would be like, well, they got killed in your jurisdiction. There's sort of that balance of it. That's the craziest thing that I personally was privy to. The other wild one is, there was a death that was so horrific on the Who Framed Roger Rabbit ride in Disneyland.
What a sentence, by the
West
way.
Coast.
Yeah.
That they couldn't cover up. It was horrific.
Like, can you give us like a
like a child got caught under the actual little cars that drove around, and it just drug him around like an acrylic pencil. By the time they were able to stop it, there was nothing left, just like a nub and the big line of where it left all of his viscera.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry I asked that question.
People say, something about Smurfs.
Smurfs? What's up with Smurfs? People are commenting about Smurfs. Do you know anything about that?
I've heard like the DMT entity aspect of it.
Like the machine elves?
Like Nephilim claims.
Right, right.
No, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not familiar with any specifics.
You're not well versed in the Smurf
Never
lore?
mind
I heard, and Gargamel might have been the good guy. I don't know. That's a common take now.
Right. It's written by the Gnostics.
Gargamel did nothing wrong.
Is it Disney movies that have a lot of parents that are dead?
Yeah. So I have a podcast called Occult Disney where we've been rewatching every single theatrical Disney animated movie since Snow White up to, I think we just got to like 2009 or so. We just did Up.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't coin this myself, and I can't remember where I heard it, but we've been developing this far more than I think anyone has, this concept called the Disney proxy. And the Disney proxy basically states that let's say it's 1985 or something. You sit your kid in front of the TV, and you just need them to be occupied for a while. So you pop in Snow White, you pop in Mary Poppins, whatever it is, so that you can go into the other room and do your adult stuff.
Yep.
And for this period of time, let's say your kid's like 4 or 5 years old, You set them in front of this television, they become entranced by this world. Like the outside world ceases to exist. And now these characters that they're introduced to become just as real as the neighbor next door would be.
Yeah.
And what usually happens in the first few minutes of a Disney movie, and this becomes more formulaic as time goes on. You can almost you know, measure the space on your watch based on how long it takes for them to introduce the dynamic. And the Disney proxy is that they will immediately have a child removed from their authority figures. Either they get kidnapped, the parents die, they get lost, they fall into a river and they get swept away, kind of like Ratatouille style. Every single Disney movie after Bambi seems to follow this formula. And the very next thing that happens after the child is removed from the authority figure, and again, if you're a 5-year-old watching this, then the protagonist getting separated, the protagonist getting kidnapped, they're identifying with that protagonist. So now it feels like you've been kidnapped, and you look around and mom's not here because she's in the other room doing the adult stuff, which is the whole reason that you got sat in front of the TV. The very next thing that'll happen is that the lead sidekick, the thing that's going to be on Happy Meal toys and lunchboxes and t-shirts, is the thing that comes and saves you. Now Thumper comes and he's your savior, or whoever they end up being, the very first thing you see. And I believe that there's an insidious formulaic aspect of this, is that they know, let's kill the parents, let's have the kid get kidnapped. Okay, now the next thing that they see on screen, they're now going to associate that. They're going to be like an NLP anchor to, this is the new savior. So now when they're at Kmart with their parents, or they're at McDonald's and they see, it's like, there's Thumper, Dad. Thumper saved me when you abandoned me. Remember that time that Mom died in the fort? The hunter shot Mom, and then we ran into Thumper. Well, now I love Thumper forever, and that burrows itself deep into the brain. And I think that once Disney saw that actually working, like we're moving more product because of this character being the first savior, they start codifying this into the movies. They start almost writing movies around this Disney proxy.
So what you're saying is not only did Disney create World War II, but also started destroying the nuclear family.
More or less, yeah. Although I don't know if you saw it that way, but Disney himself had some really weird family issues. And some of this, like this princess programming stuff about you're a princess captured in a castle by your evil step-parents, and they're preventing you from reuniting with your true royal noble blood, and that everything would be perfect if just you could escape this castle you've been imprisoned in. This is another wild Disney backstory. Have you ever heard that he was appointed a special agent in charge of the FBI by J. Edgar Hoover personally?
Nope. I didn't know that.
So this was during sort of an animator's version of the McCarthyism, where they were looking for anti-American messaging, and Walt Disney was clearly a leader in his field in this animation, subgenre. So the FBI, they realize that he's got some major daddy issues, which explains his involvement with the Demolay and a whole lot of other sort of aspects of his growing up. But they premise this where they write him a letter, and they realized that Disney considered that he was actually from a noble Spanish family, that somewhere in Spain he was related to like kings and queens, and that somehow he was either orphaned or got adopted or got kidnapped by his family that he grew up with, and that he was always trying to find his connections back to his like original roots. FBI gets wind of this, and they write him a letter, and they basically they dangle the carrot in front of him. They say, Disney, we have found some basis for your suspicions. We do think that we found this royal Spanish bloodline that you were part of, and that your actual lineage comes from real kings and queens, right? So now Disney, in his own mind, he is a Disney princess. He has been captured from his royal family, forced to live under these like the mean rules of, the stepdad. And they play this with him, and they say, hey, in exchange, we'll give you more of this information, but we want to appoint you special agent in charge, FBI, of this like rooting out anti-American sentiment in the animation industry. So it goes so deep to his core of this princess programming that I don't know if I feel like Disney's trying to program the world, or if he's just trying to work through something on his own.
Or if they're kind of puppeteering him to do these things without him even realizing it. Because the way you just described that situation, the FBI swooped in on Disney like the way Thumper does. You know, like it's like that. It's like that proxy that moves in and kind of saves the kid. And Disney seemed like like an adult kid, right? In many ways. I mean, I've watched him. I've watched documentaries about him creating Mary Poppins and just what went into that, and he was like obsessed. But he was like a child, right? Who just had a lot of money and was able to create, manifest these things in his head. That's interesting. I had no idea about that at all.
Yeah, that's from his unofficial biography. I think it's called Hollywood's Dark Prince. Although they recount the actual letter from the FBI in that. So that the book itself says a number of things that the Disney family has not been happy with over the years, and they've basically tried to debunk a large portion of that. But it's really hard to debunk an actual letter from the FBI stating, "Hey, we've looked into this. You've got family in Spain. They're royals. Now be a special agent in charge for us."
That's wild. So people can look up the letter and stuff. It's online.
Correct. Yeah. If you just look up the FBI J. Edgar Hoover Disney special agent in charge letter.
That is crazy. So now, you said you did Up. What did you see in that movie that was occultish, other than like, I guess the kid leaving his family and finding that guy?
Well, Up is an interesting movie because it does have the Disney proxy in a way, because he inadvertently kidnaps this young Asian kid that he tells him to go and look for, like this mythical snake bird creature called a snipe.
That's right.
And then he detaches his house, and as he's floating up in the air, he realizes this kid, I think his name is Russell, he realizes Russell's now along for the ride. Russell's been separated from his family, but the story tweaks it a little bit because you find out Russell is part of a broken home, that his dad no longer has any time for him. And he mentions it a couple of times about last time I called my dad, his girlfriend answered the phone and yelled at me and said that I've been taking too much time away from my dad. So they sort of flip the proxy in that, yes, he got kidnapped, but it was an accidental kidnapping, and his regular home life was not that great. So you don't really see it as the exact same premise here, but the formula is still there. They just kind of tweak it a little bit. And the other thing that stands out in Up is that it's one of the very few Disney movies in which the good guy protagonist violently assaults another human being and draws blood. There's a scene when the old guy goes out and he hits someone on the head that's there to, like, ask him if he's going to sell his house or whatever. And when he hits him on the head, the guy starts bleeding and he runs back inside and the cops come. And that's actually the catalyst for him even launching his house into the air. He's trying to escape the police that are going to basically come to arrest him for violating probation, and they're going to put him in an old man's home.
What is the darkest, most occult Disney movie that you've reviewed so far?
I would argue Fantasia, but for a very long reason. And maybe the shorter one would be Little Nemo, because in Little Nemo, the Disney proxy is like 1,000 children die at the very beginning. We see the entire colony of eggs, right? And all of them get wiped out except for this one egg. Whoa. So if you're just going like in sheer numbers, the ratio of dead children to Disney proxy, that one wins. I would say Fantasia is the most occult, though, because they are actually reimagining real occult rituals that would happen in Wolfsburger's Night, and like kind of the same premise of Cremation of Care and Bohemian Grove, except this one has far more historical relevance to it, and even established this archetype of Chernobog, which translates to the Black God. And that's this major scene when you see him kind of rise up from the mountainside. And if you pause and you look at the silhouette of Chernobog, the Black God, you'll notice that exact same silhouette is repeated over and over in Disney movies. The most obvious would be Maleficent. If you look at the actual silhouette of Maleficent, it's almost identical to the silhouette of Chernobog. And I think that this is kind of the premise of all of Fantasia. Fantasia the movie is a magical spell in which the Disney Corporation casts on the entire world in order to create something that is just fiction or magic and makes it real. And I would argue that the movie Fantasia very much makes a Disney reality in which the Disney world is going to live longer than either of us, right? Either of my kids. The Disney universe is going to live far longer than anyone that's on the planet right now. And in that case, the magical incantation of Fantasia very much worked. And even magical rituals, they tend to gain more power the more you do them over and over. So every time someone puts on Fantasia or any Disney movie, it's really just repeating a magical incantation and making it stronger.
Yeah, and anytime you encounter the branding in the real world, it kind of triggers, for lack of a better word, their magic spell, because it's like unlocking the memories inside of you. Fantasia always weirded me out as a kid. I didn't watch that one a lot. I was like, this is just weird. But it, in retrospect, I don't even understand the whole. Is there like a narrative to that movie?
No, the premise was that it was groundbreaking at the time, because what Disney had in the back of his head was that they were going to take this on the road, and that this is before even like talkies were becoming a big thing. So the premise was that you would have a traveling show, and every time you set up, you'd put the screen, but you'd also have a live orchestra behind it. So if you went to the exact same Disney show in 2 different cities, you might get a completely different experience, almost like you would if you went to a concert, because the band had a slightly different energy. Maybe they swap out this player or this instrument with another one. So it was supposed to almost be a animated vaudeville sort of effect to it. But during the course of making it, Hollywood completely changed into this, from like the silent movies into the talkies.
Wow.
And the whole entire premise of traveling around the country became less scalable, and it wasn't really as attainable as they were expecting it to originally. So Fantasia was a way to sort of crystallize what they envisioned the traveling show would look like as a standard theatrical release. And the reason why it doesn't make sense to a lot of people is because they really were just a whole bunch of little vignettes kind of squished together, and they sort of turned it into a narrative. But originally, those individual stories inside of Fantasia didn't necessarily have like a chronological order. They weren't meant to be seen in any specific way or order. It was just like a collection, the same way that you'd have like Merry Melodies or any other of like the cartoons being put together.
Do you recommend parents showing their kids Disney films?
I think with a caveat that in my opinion, the most insidious thing Disney does is that they own real estate in your kid's brain, and they kind of will forever. But it also becomes this weird dynamic where some parents will be like, well, of course we have to give our 3-year-old an iPad because every other 3-year-old has an iPad, and we don't want them to like stick out as these weird, be ostracized because I guess they're like anti-tech, or they're just not keeping up with the Joneses, right? And I think that Disney has now reached such a cult conglomerate status that not allowing your kids to watch Disney movies could be perceived as now you're not allowing them to go through the same social interactions with other people they're going to run into in school and later in life. Like, you're holding your kids back developmentally from not allowing them to watch Disney. I think that's so insidious because it almost ends up being true, but you also have to realize that it never leaves their brain. For example, all these grim fairy tales, all these public domain stories, if you were to say Snow White, if you were to say Alice in Wonderland or Cinderella, most of the time what you conjure up in your head is an intellectual property owned by the Disney Corporation. It's not the public domain version of Alice. It's like the Disney version of Alice. And the more they do that, the more that they literally own thoughts in your head that they can monetize and you can't. So that's probably the part that I'd say be weary of. But I'm not as scared of Dick Castles or the word sex in the sky written out in like dust and feathers.
Yeah. It's weird that a corporation has monopolized our imagination while also monopolizing, in a way, imagination. Like what you were saying with it's going to outlive, us. This thing's going to last forever. It's like this is beast forever. But I'm with you on that. And like you just let them watch with a caveat. But
someone in our chat wants to know, they said, at Disneyland, there are secret rooms throughout the park, some for special guests, but some are strange, like the child's room with the see-through windows inside Pirates of the Caribbean. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, there's one, I think it's Club 33, and this is more of a thing on the West Coast in Disneyland. And originally, it was the little secret doors and rooms where you could go and get drunk. Like, they didn't serve alcohol anywhere on the property.
On Adrenochrome.
Unless you knew, and Adrenochrome. That if you knew about where these secret doors were at, and I think that there's a hefty price tag. It's like 5 figures to be a member per year.
Wow.
And it's just a way that you can drink on property. That's the surface explanation. I've heard all the rumors that you go into one of those rooms and yeah, you just snap a kid's neck off and you drink the adrenochrome, you go back out into the park. I don't think that those necessarily are true.
I believe it. He said it. He worked there. He's the expert. He's been there 10 years. You heard it here first, everyone. Paranoid American has just confirmed it. Walt Disney's ghost just came into this room and is haunting me. Yeah, that's wild though. But what I was going to say with children watching it and what you're saying about kids kind of being left out of the conversation of the culture that Disney's monopolized. It's like, oh, they have to participate in the fear ritual of watching a Disney movie, because how you describe leaving a kid alone in a room as they're watching the parents die or disappear as the kid is separated and then linked to some stranger, that's a fear ritual, that the kid doesn't really realize they're going through. We've watched Disney movies, and like I said, I like Mary Poppins, but even that, it's weird because I would never let my kids go out with a stranger. Like that I didn't do a background check on. Those characters didn't care. Different times, yeah. It's weird though. Man, well, I got to look into some of this, the FBI connection, because I had no idea about that in Disney. I think that's fascinating. It sounds even weirder than when Elvis was deputized by Nixon. It was weird times. But before we let you go, please let everyone know where they can find you. You make awesome comic books. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but tell us about the comic books real quick. I've got the stuff that Sam Tripoli's doing. Sam's been on the show. He's a great guest, great guy.
Our caller canceled, so we can.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so we have some time then. So tell us about the comic books, man, because it's amazing.
Well, this dovetails directly with Disney because I've been a conspiracy theorist since I was 12 or 13. I'd argue as soon as I found out about Santa Claus. I won't spoiler alert it, but as soon as I found out about Santa
kids
Claus,
are watching
and
the
it was my parents are in on this, my teachers, my grandparents, every single authority figure that I knew for the first 7 or 8 years of my life, they were all in on this massive conspiracy, and it flipped my brain to realize, what else are they lying about? That can't be the only thing. The one thing that I find out about was the only lie. So it kind of sent me down this. So anyway, long story is that I end up at Disney. I've already been a conspiracy theorist for well over a decade at this point. Yep. And I remember this one day in particular. I can't remember what property we were working on. It might have been Cars. And they had a whole bunch of artists in from Burbank and all over Orlando in this little brainstorming session. And I looked to my right, and this guy worked on Aladdin. I looked to my left, this guy did some of the main feature animation for Lion King.
Wow.
And I was just like, man, it would be so dope if these guys next to me right now drew me a cool MK Ultra victim sketch or something, just something that would combine this Disney world that I'm with into the conspiracy theories that I would like to be working on. I don't want to work on Cars and Goofy. I want to be talking about Sidney Gottlieb and Adrenochrome, right?
Yeah, Poisoner in Chief.
That one day I was at lunch, I was hey, to my friend Brian, and I was hey man, would you want to just throw around an idea for a short little story, maybe a little comic book about these Project Monarch survivors? I had just finished reading the Franklin cover-up, very dark stuff, right? The Franklin scandal and Lawrence King. And I basically wanted to make a Disney version of that story to sort of present it to someone outside of the Conspiracy of Silence crowd that was already deep into that. I wanted to find a normie that liked Disney stuff and entice them with Disney level animation and Disney level illustrations, and then be wait, what happened to these kids? What's their origin story? Whoa. And that's kind of where Paranoid American even started. It started as me thinking it would be a waste of potential to not have these Disney level animators help convey conspiracy. Now, I found out pretty quickly that not a lot of other people in the office were as into conspiracy theories as I was, and they look into what the Franklin scandal was all about, and then I learned to maybe not bring that up as much, but it didn't kill the passion for that. So I began my very first comic series was called Time Samplers, and it was made by a lot of the concept art was by a bunch of Disney animators and illustrators that were my coworkers, and that comic series Time Samplers is about 3 kids that escape from Project Monarch facility in Chile called Dignity Colony that was essentially where they claim a lot of the Nazi rat lines ended up.
Yep.
And that this is where like the Fritz Springmeier Illuminati mind control stuff was going on. Like it had all of those deep assets to it.
I love it.
Again, over time, I realized not everyone wants to jump directly into the deep end of like trauma-based mind control.
Yep.
So I've eased back a little bit. Now I'm working on comics about like Bigfoot, the Satanic Panic, the Bavarian Illuminati. The series that I'm doing with Sam Tripoli is called Chaos Twins, and this one is basically the first all ages friendly. Because Sam came to me and he was basically describing, I want to be able to talk about conspiracy theories to parents and to their kids and not get into these like weird fringe topics where it's almost like endangering someone to even mention. Like you don't want to tell a kid about Adrenochrome and about Project Monarch,
Right.
but maybe it's cool to tell them about Mothman or Bigfoot or just the general premise of conspiracy theories and Men in Black as a whole.
Right.
So that's kind of where Chaos Twins birthed out of. And ever since then, man, yeah, every other little topic that I think has too much fear, like there's a lot of Adrenochrome fear type stuff. There's a lot of Freemason and Illuminati fear type content out there, but there's not a lot that gives it that Disney treatment. So that still is like the DNA, and everything I do is I try and take like the scariest, the darkest conspiracy theories and then blend it in everything that I learned while I was at Disney for 10 years and try and soften the edges a little bit. And that's kind of the DNA of Paranoid American.
What was it when you were 12 that got you into, other than, was it just Santa, or was there some other event that got you your brain going?
It was kind of the ubiquity of X-Files and Men in Black. And one of the things that I mentioned too is if you go back and watch cartoons in the 80s and 90s, there's like this motif where in the background, you'd see a little video camera like scanning the playground, right? Or you would see in the background a guy in a black suit and black glasses kind of whispering into his ear.
Yep.
And they would never explain what's going on, but you inherently knew, oh, that's Big Brother, or that's like the eye in the sky that's looking at us. And it was almost like I didn't need to be told to be a conspiracy theorist. I already knew that in every single cartoon and movie that I watched, the same thing with the moon landing, right? And in so many of the movies and cartoons, it's this running joke that the moon landing was all a big like a hoax and a fake.
What?
And this was implanted. Like if you go back and watch
Disney.
like Recess,
Yeah.
Recess was a popular.
I remember Recess. Yeah.
So in the Recess movie, there's a few scenes, and the movie itself is about the CIA coming in and taking over this warehouse and yeah, dude. If you go back and watch the actual Recess Disney movie,
No way.
the CIA comes in and they're training like these robots to kind of take over, and the kids break in, and on the billboards in the background of this school that they're in, you can even see like, here's how we faked the moon landing. They don't talk about it. It's just in the background, and and I think that is that like ubiquitous sort of conspiracy that pervaded everything. I mean, this was also, I was raised on like Harry and the Hendersons. I remember growing up and reading the unsolved mystery style books about spontaneous combustion and Atlantis and all of this kind of melded together. And this was also pre 9/11, and it was in this unique point of time that a lot of people missed out on, when being a conspiracy theorist didn't necessarily ascribe you to a political faction. It didn't really say anything else about any of your ideologies, just that you were open to aliens or open to Bigfoot or open to mind control.
Yeah. Oh man, the good old days. You could just be a conspiracy theorist without being attached to some ideology. So since you were into this stuff by around 12, 13, and now we live in a world where it feels like everyone's a conspiracy theorist, what's your take on that?
I feel like a hipster. I feel like I was here before it was cool. Like I was here before 2020 hit. I was here before even 9/11 hit. Like I can kind of like show my credentials too. I can prove I've got like reports from my principal about spreading conspiracy theories in like middle school and stuff. So I don't know. I feel like I've got some of like the badges that I can show off on that.
Yeah.
I also feel that despite having so much more information at our fingertips now, people seem to rely on the headlines more than they ever did, even when there's less of an excuse to. And I think another thing that I've learned recently, mostly doing like podcasts and talking to other people about this, it's not as fun to dig into a conspiracy theory so deep that you start finding the nuance. Usually the fun and the novelty of it is the headline, and it's like, Hillary Clinton is sticking a Capri Sun straw into a baby's head and
Right.
slurping out, the fountain of youth. Like
Right.
that part carries such a strong visual and it's so entertaining that it'll move way farther than saying, well, technically this was found in the early 1930s and it was in dementia precox research. No, by the way, dementia precox might relate to schizophrenia. Like all of that is far more boring than just throwing the rest of it out on the table. And I feel that there's more of that going on. And the other big difference between now and like the 90s or early 2000s is that in the 90s, you would have conspiracy theory documentaries. You'd have Alex Jones documentaries and Bill Still and Money Masters and Mystery Babylon by William Cooper and Jordan Maxwell and stuff.
100%.
But what changed now is that an Alex Jones documentary, let's not say in 2025, he's on a different trajectory now, but in the mid 2000s or 2010s, it was kind of like him as a personality. Like all of a sudden the conspiracy theorist becomes in the limelight, whereas prior to that it was about the things that they were looking into and researching. They were nobody. They were just some random public access dude, and they couldn't leverage their personality to carry the show. They had to have some kind of salacious research, and that's kind of flip-flopped a little bit. Now all of these conspiracy theories, it's like, oh, who's saying it? And if it's, if David Icke's saying it, okay, I'm all in on David Icke. I love David Icke.
I was just going to say,
and it gets sold on the personality more than on the research itself.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think, to me, as much as the headlines stuff is just hilarious, and some of it, it goes back and forth between true and false, and there's a gray area. The nuanced part of it is scarier to me than the headlines, because then you start to get into like, the way you kept saying, like, this goes into this. If you see this part of the story, it leads into this research. And you see how there's this web, this giant conspiracy at play, like the MK Ultra can connect to the Adrenochrome. You talk about Sidney Gottlieb, the poisoner in chief, and how that relates to Operation Paperclip. That to me is far more terrifying than just a salacious headline. Because then you realize you're kind of trapped in this world, that they've created around you of depravity and experimentation that, we can talk about till we're blue in the face, but it's never going to go away because they're.
Well, I'd say it's less fun. That's kind of the lead there. Is that it's not as fun, even if it's more interesting, even if it scares you more and it's more true. It's less fun to talk about because now you got to do research.
Yeah. Oh, it's too bad. I love doing that. Unfortunately,
we have a super chat.
Yeah,
totally wild coincidence, but Monsters Inc. is actually about adrenochrome. Pretty wild. That's what
Oh, absolutely. That one is
up.
probably one of the strongest indications because they're literally collecting fear out of the children. They call it Scream in that particular case. Also, if you look at like Doctor Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining, they do a similar thing and they call it Steam instead of Scream. And it's the same thing. They actually target young children, young orphans that they have to torture this like steam out of them, and it lets them live longer and have like a more youthful experience. Even in Stephen King's, Stephen King's got like 3 or 4 different works that all tie into this. In it, Pennywise describes fear as salting the meat. So there's this like ongoing recurring theme that I think you can tie back to this old like blood libel and like blood magic, but that somehow fear heightens or makes more potent something about innocent children's blood or their meat or their essence. If you scare them enough, then it makes them more valuable, which again is Monsters Inc. Yeah, it's straight up Monsters Inc. And we know that these evil people like to get away with doing the worst, most nightmarish stuff to children, Epstein stuff, we know all that, but that's just one small facet of a long line of this depravity. So I think, it's unfortunate that this is constantly happening in our world. They're constantly going after kids. I say that, Hillary Clinton's obviously eating children. I can't prove it yet, but I'm pretty sure she is. I can sneak one more in here,
Please.
kind of on like the political Clinton sort of tangent here, is that another movie that came out the year before Monsters Inc. There was a movie called The Cell that had Jennifer Lopez in it and Vince Vaughn. You remember this movie, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And there's this very iconic scene when she goes down, and I believe it's either a cow or a horse, and she walks up to this. I'm going to say it's a cow. I can't remember what it is. She walks with this cow, and as soon as she walks up to it, these plates of glass fall from the ceiling, and they basically, cut this cow up in all these different pieces, and they spread themselves across. And now where she can like walk in between these different slices of the cow with its heart still beating and it's still alive. Well, that very particular scene was based on an art installation by a guy named Damien Hirst, who I believe is now like the richest artist out of the UK in history. Like he's made the most money on a lot of this. He came onto the scene after an auction at Christie's, I believe it was, and his very first piece that sold for a significant amount of money was called Adrenochrome Semicarbazone.
Hmm.
And the actual collector was a German guy, and it remained somewhat anonymous through the years. But one of the other major collectors of Damien Hirst's work was Tony Podesta, and I believe John Podesta might have had some of his work as well. And some of those pieces that they collected were these maps of the world with all sorts of like nuclear messaging and biological warfare sort of symbols on like superimposed on top of this map.
Huh.
So here you've got just another really weird connection between Adrenochrome by name and the fine art world and the political world.
Well, now that you said it, you reminded me of something. Isn't there some weird connection in the theories, perhaps, between Adrenochrome and Pizzagate, since you brought up Podesta?
And Hillary.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. The whole premise, I think, a large section of Pizzagate was that they were trafficking, large amounts of kids back and forth, and you could probably equate like Pizzagate was just the 2000s version of the Franklin scandal that
Right.
was in the 80s and 90s, and the exact same claims were being made in the 80s and 90s without the word adrenochrome attached to it, but the exact same practices. There was some of the footage from Paul Benassi and Troy Boner, who were the people that alleged all this abuse during the Franklin scandal cases. They actually would state that they would be like poked by hot pokers and scared and tortured, all for these proclivities of like these elites that went all the way up into the White House and midnight tours of the White House and everything that goes along with that. And this was basically the exact same story all over again. It was Franklin scandal, Epstein, Pizzagate. It's kind of the same story, just for a different generation.
Yep. Did you hear that the Pizzagate shooter was shot and killed last year?
I did hear that, yeah.
That was crazy. Like it was the end of last year, I believe, and he was pulled over, and there's some traffic. I don't know. He's pulled over for some driving violation, and they shot him in the car, I believe. I always thought that was weird. Interesting.
North Carolina.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina.
Yep.
What was his name?
Oh God. Edgar Madison. Does that sound right?
I think that's right. Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
Man.
Edgar Madison
Well,
Watch.
this was a fun one. Please tell everyone, my friend, where they can find you online. All the places.
The best place is probably paranoidamerican.com. Who knows if I'm going to be up on YouTube this week or not, or on Instagram or not. So yeah, if you go to paranoidamerican.com, you can check out all of my comics and graphic novels and books and occult magazines and everything that I've been working on over the last 15 years plus. It's all 100% original. It's things that I've worked on with actual human beings. There's no AI stuff in there. I do a lot of AI for like commercials and little jingles and stuff, but all of the artwork, everything that you see on there, I've even got sort of custom toys that I've been putting together. I've actually got one here. I've got a Super Predator playset that's got a little light up severed head and a reptilian.
That's
reptilian Hillary
hilarious.
Clinton here, holding a grimoire, and there's like a little jar of adrenochrome on the table here. So
Dude, that's
I'm doing my best to really take the scariest and most fear sort of soaked conspiracy theories, and again, giving them like the Disney and Lego treatment. Like I want to commoditize and like normalize laughing about some of this stuff instead of just constantly being basked in fear.
And we got to undo all the fear rituals that they're forcing onto our children. And that's a good way to fight it, I think.
Well, ridicule. I think ridicule is probably one of the best weapons that we've got.
100%. That's why they want to censor comics first, like comedians. It's like they're the ones who are always on the front lines of calling out all the insane stuff in our society. And they were the first people that they really went after when it comes to censorship. And it's ridiculous. But, dude, thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And and Sound Science as well, like I mentioned. Check that out. I just did that show with you. And, man, I'm spacing on his name, Grey Pilled, right?
Yeah, Jules from Great Pill Podcast. Yes, no,
Incredible.
I've got a whole bunch of different
Yeah, you're busy.
podcasts. That's one of my favorite ones. We just talk about music. We don't even have to get into conspiracies or occult.
Yep.
We just listen to music and talk about music, and it's a great time.
So much fun. Well, I appreciate you having me on your shows. I'm so glad you were able to join us tonight, and I hope everyone looks you up and finds everything you do, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Later, dude.
Bye.
Man. Oh, the FBI. Oh, the FBI.
Are you just gonna have your kids watch Mary Poppins on repeat?
Not anymore.
No.
Look at me. Look at this. You know, she's a villain this whole time.
She's a.
No, I still, I see that point of view. I've gotten into it with other people about how, she's a bad character and introduces chaos to the family. And I see those points, but I still believe that it's about, bringing the family back together that was broken. And also learning to like have fun as a family, enjoy your imagination and having the structure too, without being totally insane with no structure and all imagination, which is why we have leftists today.
We're Toy Story people.
You're Toy Story people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
It's the best. All four.
Great movie. Yeah, which is your favorite?
3.
Okay.
3 is the best.
Is it?
It's pretty deep.
I can't even think of like which one's which.
Oh my god. I know them.
I can think of
all
the
so
first
well.
one really well. I watched that one a bunch.
Yeah.
I love that. Is it,
You should rewatch them.
okay. All right.
Watch them with the kids.
Is there any occult stuff in there I should be
Oh, I don't
worried
know.
about? Should
I don't
ask
think
him?
so. I mean, toys come to life. That's a little
Yeah.
creepy.
It's like
though.
an alchemy, and Sid's a scary character.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
For sure.
Is he in all of them?
He's just in the first one.
Oh, really?
I think, yeah.
Oh, wow. Because they killed him, right? The toys. Is that what happens in the
They
first one?
sold that
They
kid.
killed Sid.
They
The
killed Sid.
toys actually
That
ate
was scary.
Sid's adrenochrome,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's how it goes?
Something like that.
I'm
Sure.
pretty sure we watched the same Toy Story. Wow. So the caller had to bounce.
I love
huh?
it. Oh, yeah. Caller bounced, had an emergency.
Oh, that's
so.
all good. That's all good. Well, man, that was wild. Thank you.
Well, also, I forgot to tell you, we had the kids watch some alien propaganda this weekend.
How'd that go?
Mac and Me. Have you ever heard of it?
Of course.
Oh my God. First of
Was
all,
it
it's
good?
been years since
Did it
I've
hold up?
Not really, but I was really, I mean, for me, maybe because it was like bringing up some memories as a
Right.
kid, but it's pretty funny. I don't know.
The only thing I remember from Mac and Me now is that every time Paul Rudd did Conan O'Brien.
That's what Chris told me he did.
Yeah.
I didn't even know he did
Every
that.
time Paul Rudd is on Conan O'Brien, over all the years, he'd be promoting a new movie, and Conan would be like, okay, we're going to cut to show a clip from Paul's new movie. And every time Paul would bring a clip, the same clip from Mac and Me.
The wheelchair, he goes
The
over
wheelchair off the cliff.
First of all, I could not remember that scene.
I love that clip.
When that scene happened, though, I was like, what is even happening?
so
Why
good.
would they do this?
Yeah, so good. 90s movie, right? Early 90s?
I think it was made 89.
Oh, is
so
it?
like,
Okay.
yeah, but
No, I don't think I've introduced much alien propaganda into the household yet.
that was an interesting one.
Yeah, the kids don't really, I don't know what they like right now.
You just don't let them watch TV.
We don't have a TV, so we don't really watch much. We like play outside a lot, but we do a lot of Bible stuff. No,
fun.
I know what they're into right now. I was spacing.
Spacing?
No. They're my brain was spacing, but they're super into like Greek mythology. So they
That's
have
deep. What are
they
your
have,
kids?
they have Yodo players. You know those things? This is not. I'm not sponsored by Yodo players, but they're really fun, and they're like audiobooks
Okay.
with cards
Yes. Okay.
and like a little digital face, like pixelated, and you put the card in. And the card could be any book. Like there's audiobooks of most children's books. But they're super into like Jason and the Argonauts and the Odyssey. And what they have is like a kid's version.
Yeah.
Because I did
hope
show
so.
our son parts of the actual Odyssey, but I had to skip because there's parts I'm like, that's not
too
for
much.
children. Just whether it was too gory or because they're young
Yeah.
or like too sexual,
Yeah.
because there's crazy scenes in the Odyssey. But I highly recommend everyone getting into those.
People are talking about E.T., which is a great movie. It's a really that
E.T.
holds
freaked
up
me
for
out.
sure.
Actually, Paranoid American kind of triggered some PTSD in me while he was talking about Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh yeah.
That
John
movie
Lithgow.
and show freaked me out.
Yeah.
If you guys know what that guy looks like, Harry and Hendersons, can you pull him up real quick?
Yeah.
I wanna induce my own adrenochrome glands right now by staring directly into the eyes of Harry and Hendersons. Harry from the Hendersons. this Sasquatch monster.
Oh yeah, I think we.
Dude, pull up this sicko.
Oh wait, there we
Oh
go.
my goodness, why? And they made him lovable, but was he about to eat that dog? And honestly,
this bigger?
Lithgow is terrifying. Just Lithgow's face is terrifying. Can we like zoom in on that?
I
or
know it's
something?
like not letting me.
Okay, that's probably for the best. Let's just flip through some of these pictures here. This really, really bothered me as a kid. Maybe more so than Alf. Like Alf was bothersome.
Alf pops up on our TV sometimes, and
Ugh.
Chris loves Alf.
Shoot your TV. But look at this. Why would they do this?
It looks exactly like a Sasquatch, though, right?
Why would they do this to people? And
back then nothing
Oh.
fazed us, I guess.
oh my god, this guy.
That's pretty bad.
That's terrifying. I think they hit him by accident, right? In their station wagon.
I don't remember much about
maybe
that
they
one.
bring him home, but he's loving. Like he's happy. He's part of the family.
He's not eating the dog.
As far as I know, I don't remember. He might have tried, but man, that freaked me out.
Yeah, these pictures are not great.
And Lithgow's face is just terrifying. Lithgow was great in Dexter.
What is this? Is this even the same thing?
This might be the TV show because they made it a TV show. They just had to milk it for everything.
When Lithgow was done on Dexter, then Dexter was done.
Dexter,
And then they kept going.
The show died.
Yeah.
After that season.
Yeah.
Well,
but they kept going. But it was for us. It was.
Yeah,
done.
we're getting into like super nerd stuff right now, but I'll talk about it real quick because the head writers quit after that season.
Oh, that makes sense. Then.
It totally changed.
Yeah.
And those head writers are really good. And that last season with John Lithgow and what happens with everything, that's one of the greatest seasons of television, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And like what happens at that final season finale is insane. I remember turning it off and being like, I just kept repeating a certain character's name, being like, oh my goodness, how did that happen? That's crazy. He was great.
Yeah.
He was so good in that show. Love that show. Well, that was a fun one.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah, guys, if you got stories, we did have a caller, but they bounced. And hopefully they'll come back next week. And you can hit me up at Shane Cashman at scanner.com, scnr.com. If you got a story, let me know. We'll bring you on. Alex, where are you at these days online? You there?
I am Alex Ayala on X sometimes.
Sometimes. Mostly on other places.
Yeah.
Like MySpace.
Oh, yeah.
Friendster.
MySpace.
Big on Friendster.
I have my top 8 friends, okay? And there's really only 2.
Top 8. Whenever you could do like top 24.
Was it?
Yeah. Like at a certain point when MySpace was starting to go down the hill, they were like, you just have like top 100 friends.
I think I was really into MySpace, and then I was not into Facebook, and I'm still not into Facebook.
No, I've been kicked off Facebook. I can't even use it. It's been like a year.
I mean, I like Instagram, but it's more private. And
Yeah.
I'm into TikTok. And I think I send you TikToks and you never watch them.
I don't have
Do you,
TikTok.
like,
I was
refuse
ticked
to?
off TikTok.
I'm going to start screen
I can't
recording
open
them.
You
and
send me
them
it, and
to
I can't,
you.
and it's like, open it up. I'm like, I can't. You kicked me off 3 times now. And I had a pretty big account in there. And then they kicked me off for fake clouds.
Yeah.
Disinformation. Of all the things I've shared, it was the fake clouds. Really not a controversial post, I thought. And they were like, nope, you can't talk about fake clouds.
That means they are.
I didn't.
guess.
Well, that was proof. Chinese company
They didn't think
protecting
this
their
through.
Chinese fake cloud factories. Well,
Anyway.
guys, thank you for joining us. You can hit me up at Shane Cashman on all the platforms that rot our brains, and we'll see you next week. Later.